welcome to Memoirs of Successful Women. Today we're going to be talking all things adventuring, exploring the planet, on how we can just try and improve the outcomes for people from disadvantaged areas around the world in an educational sense. I have a guest today called Dr. Kate Leeming. She's an adventurer, explorer. She cycled a distance, wait to hear this, greater than twice the world circumference, and has attained 4 world first achievements in her major expeditions through Europe, across Russia, excuse my throat, and throughout Australia and Africa. Integral to Kate's journey is the Breaking the Cycle experiential education program, which we're going to talk about today, that aims to help prepare our future leaders to make informed decisions to create a better world. When not on an expedition, Kate is a professional at the Royal Melbourne Tennis Club. She's also won 5 Australian Open singles titles and 6 doubles titles, and has been ranked as high as number 2 in real tennis, which is the original game of tennis. So welcome to the program, Kate.
Thanks, Annie. Lovely to be there. It's usually I have to explain to everybody what real tennis is, because I just the game we watch in Wimbledon or the Australian Open. But that's kind of another passion that we're probably not going to talk much about. But it's it's a very cool game. It's a little bit like a mixture between tennis, squash, and chess. So there's a lot more to it, and I'm a very it's kind of like my other passion as such. So we start talking about my other passion first.
A woman with many passions, and many of them sporty. I can see very much sporty. Now, I know you actually started did degrees in sports and ended up progressing it and getting an honorary doctorate. So we can talk about that. But I'd love to go right back to the beginning. And you've grown up pretty much in rural, I think, Western Australia. How does a girl... were you on a farm? Were you on a property? How does this girl become a global adventurer? So tell us about your origins and what inspired you to actually go, you know what, I want to make a difference on this planet.
Well, it just started. I mean, I grew up on a wheat and sheep farm about 130 kilometres east of Perth. And really now I understand how lucky I was, just being able to have that freedom. The nearest neighbour was 5 kilometres away. Just, working hard, being a part of that land, having that connection with the land, which that's always been really important to me. And then went away to boarding school in Perth, was an all-round sports person. So that's where some of it comes from in the first place. So I was kind of like state level in about 4 different sports, and went to the UK with my university playing hockey, of which... I'd always dreamed about cycling in Europe. I'd done a little bit of cycling in Western Australia, but I didn't really have the confidence to do anything like that. It's just like, that's not what's expected of society kind of thing. But by the time I got to the UK, after that hockey tour, which was, great fun with 30 of my best friends, that was an opportunity to explore Europe. And, some people take a bus, but or whatever. And I just really loved this idea of cycling. I'd always dreamed of Italy or France, cycling there, but I didn't really have the confidence. But I got a couple of friends to come with me. I planned the first little trip in France, and then, to cut a long story short, little trips led to bigger trips. And over the space of the next couple of years, I did about 15,000 kilometers as kind of my personal discovery and exploration of Europe. So I guess that's where I really found my passion for traveling by bike. And I guess the main sort of intrinsic reasons as to why I like to travel like that way is because you're very connected with the people in the land. And I really love this idea of just bringing a line on a map to life. And just feel very, it really sort of helps me to understand how the world fits together, or that part of the world fits together. It's very connected, and it tends to bring out the best in people. You can eat as much as you like, it doesn't really matter. But really the passion, this idea of planning something and then having this adventure where you have to be able to sometimes adapt to get to where I need to go. But yeah, that was kind of it. Every journey now sort of becomes a little bit of a part of me and who I am. And I guess that's kind of, I say, the intrinsic reasons and for traveling by bike. Then I was based in the UK at the time. I met Robert Swan, who's first person history to have walked to both the North and South Poles. And I happened to meet him at my work in London. And Robert sort of took me under his wing, and he sort of saw something there, obviously. And so he helped mentor me. I was planning a big journey across Russia at that time, and he sort of helped me with that. And one thing he really taught me was that there was much more value to what I was doing than simply riding a bike. And so when I organized the Trans-Siberian Cycle Expedition, I chose to aid children affected by the Chernobyl disaster because it was very topical at that time. So then everything since I've done since then has been either sort of trying to support the people or places that I'm traveling through, working with education. There's always extra benefits that I'm always trying to create from these journeys. I mean, it's such a privilege to be able to do them. And, you know, my confidence over that time has sort of gradually increased as well. And, you know, firstly, it takes a bit of courage probably to step out and do these things. But once I'm in it, it's kind of, it's just what it's meant to be.
You're just you're following your destiny, right?
Yeah, whatever that's going to be.
So when you started cycling, you started going, you know what, I'm just going to cycle. That's right. It's just a line on a map. Well, I'm actually going to make it real, and I'm going to be there like on the land the whole time. I'm going to connect with the people. What did you learn? Did you do that solo? Did you team up with others? Was there a group? What happened with your safety, your security, the mechanics of actually doing that when you first started compared to what you do now?
So it really, everything just sort of folds in front of me, really. You know, I started off the first little journey I planned. I had one of my hockey friends, and then another fellow joined us in Ireland. And then that was just 5 days. But then the bigger plan was to cycle through France, and then a couple of other hockey friends came with me, and then they wanted to go off and do something else. And I just, you know, I'd planned it. So that's the thing, is that I'm quite a planner. And so I'm not just doing any old line on a map. I'm actually trying to create a story, or initially it was just what I'm interested in to see, and looking at the regions and which regions I wanted to see, and sort of connecting them together. Then, you know, in the middle of France, when the others went off to smoke dope in Toulouse or something, you know, I continued. So all of a sudden I was in the Massif Central, cycling towards Bordeaux on my own, don't speak the language. But there was something about that freedom that was very amazing, and especially in France, but not only. You know, I was amazed at how it just brings out the best in people. People try to help you all the time, and it seems like there's a lot of danger, but actually, I think it's actually a pretty safe way to travel, much safer than, you know, traveling on a bus or a train, and the train stations and bus stations that tends to, you know, attract the wrong types of people sometimes. So I don't know, traveling by bike, you're just really out there. I mean, there's no more danger in any other country as long as you've done the research. There's no more danger there than there is here riding a bike. So it's and a woman on a bike, again, was often perceived as being very strong, like confident enough to do it. So I've had very few issues. In fact, I've had more issues when I'm traveling with someone than on my own. Probably I take fewer risks on my own. People tend to, you know, there's been a couple who try to do, you know, silly things, but I've sort of managed to act in the right way to put them off. But honestly, I've had very few issues, and, you know, I've always managed to, if I know that there's an area that we might need help or whatever, then I've always managed to find local people. So, for example, the way Russia was organized, it was myself, and I had a British guy, Greg Yeoman, with me. And then we always had a Russian with us as well, even if that Russian didn't speak English. So so Robert Swan connected me with his fellow polar explorer in Russia. And I came on board with Misha. I went across there beforehand. I met him. We had a plan where the cyclists that I'd connected with and some of their people cycled with us. And so they spoke the language. You know, we could avoid things like, you know, problems changing money, getting ripped off. That they would find out whether there are bandits. If there's somewhere it's a little bit unsafe, we could give it a wide berth or make sure we don't put ourselves in a position where we're going to get in trouble. And yeah, that worked to a T. We got to Vladivostok after 5 months, a day ahead of schedule, even going through like 1,500 kilometers of swampland, just sticking to those goals, but also having a good plan for safety, as you say. And so each, often traveling by myself, I feel relatively safe. It's not the other way around, like a lot of people might think.
It's easier to look after yourself than to be worrying about someone else, their writing, their choices, and then having to,
cover over.
I actually slightly relate to that, just because of, when you decide to go on a little bit of a convoy trip, even in the car, it's kind of like suddenly you've got to have all this extra effort worrying about someone else. So I can slightly imagine what you're trying to say there. So tell me about what Robert Swan saw in you, in the essence of, you started just loving the freedom, you love the bike riding, you love the adventure, and here you off just, having this great life. And then he saw something more in you that you could make a difference with this. And how did that lead to breaking the cycle and what you actually have chosen to do through all of your adventures?
Robert was just used to come into the health club where I was working. So, I had already cycled and probably spoke with a lot of enthusiasm about that when I cornered him. And then I was starting to plan this journey across Siberia, because it was just as Russia was opening up.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's why it was even more special, this journey. And to try to, because you couldn't get any information about most of that area.
Mm-hmm.
I'd found Russian cycling club addresses and sent them letters, but you didn't even know whether the letters or it was faxes then. Faxes would get to the right people, but I did have some responses, but how do you coordinate all of that? So that's Robert helped me with the plan, i.e. introducing me to his fellow polar explorer, Dr. Misha Malakov, who's an amazing fellow, Lenin medalist, and it's like a Russian version of Rocky, I reckon. You don't mess with Misha, but Misha and I got on really, really well, and he realized that I was serious about what I was doing and had enough experience. So they don't mess, they wouldn't waste their time on me if they didn't think that I worked hard and planned things and had enough experience already. So I guess that's part of it. And then just like if they give me some advice, I would go and look it up and try and follow it up. So you take their advice seriously and see what they've done and think, okay, this is a great opportunity here. He was UN ambassador for youth and the environment at the time. I was like, okay, let's go with this. And I guess Robert actually didn't really have to do that much. I just took it, took that advice and went back to him to ask questions if I had them or whatever. And the education thing didn't really happen then. Even though I'm a qualified teacher, I wasn't really working as a teacher. After the Russian expedition, I became a real tennis professional. I discovered the game in the UK, became a pro. That was my adventure for 10 years. To battle knee injuries always since then, because I had a particularly unfortunate injury on the tennis court. So that's something I've always had to work with. And then still really wanted to see how my own country matched up. And with everything else that I'd seen in Russia and Europe. So that's when I came back to Australia as I was deputy head professional at the Royal Melbourne Tennis Club, but I really still wanted to see Australia. So I planned that journey and then had to leave my job. I've left my job 3 times to do the big ones. Planned that. And this time I thought about, this is when sustainability was just becoming a concept that a lot of people still didn't really understand. And because of my interest, especially from my farming background, my interest in geography, it was just seemed to make sense to me to not just explore my country, but sort of look at some of the sort of education for sustainable development. So stopping in at schools, remote, Aboriginal outstations and things. So it was very cool. Speaking with the schools of the air. And at the same time, I was sort of exploring, land management issues and meeting with a lot of, station owners and farmers who are just awesome. I mean, I immediately know how to get on with them and got on with them really well. So I was able to create a story, and that's what I've been trying to do always, but in particular ever since, like designing journeys to actually tell particular stories. So that becomes everything that I'm trying to do is embedded in the story, and everything I'm doing basically. So that's how it started, and that was taken up as one of Australia's first official activity for the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. So UNESCO sponsored that one, and that was my first attempt at making an education program. It wasn't used that much, but what I realized is the story was really important, and also just weaving in these interactions with different people on that journey. So that's a big part of it, which everything that I do, and each time I develop these things a little bit more. So I wasn't raising money for anything. It was just really raising awareness about sustainable development and what that is and what that can look like. And so a lot of people didn't really understand. I think, oh, you're just a greenie or something. No. This is like, we all have to embrace this stuff, which obviously I think we've got the message now. Not everyone, but a lot of people have. And then with Africa, I'd had sort of lots of taking that a bit further. I didn't have the confidence in the past to cycle through Africa. Everyone, would say, oh, it's this dangerous place, but I'd always been intrigued by Africa, and that's the continent. Like, there's 54 different countries. It's not just
phenomenal. And you crossed, I think, 22,000 kilometers in 10 months.
and 20 different countries. So it, basically, I had a plan. I was looking at the causes and effects of extreme poverty, but specifically what's being done to give a leg up rather than a handout. So I'd arranged to meet different projects and organizations during the journey. In fact, there were 15 of them eventually that I met up with. So I was telling this grounded story about the real Africa and not the one that we get cherry picked in the media, which leads people to think, oh, you're going to die, because people thought I was going to die when I was crossing from the most westerly tip to the most easterly tip. And I, done my research, a lot of research. I had, I think, 30 different partners. It was very, very complex to pull together. And in areas that we knew particularly tricky, going through the Sahara region for a start, there are certain parts of that area. So that's the shoreline of this Sahara Desert, and where a lot of the particular issues, I was initially looking at education, and that's how I got the idea, the importance of education. And what I could see is the countries in most need of improved education basically spanned Africa from west to east. And that's how I got my idea for the story. So that was kind of what I was doing. It wasn't just making the first crossing,
sure.
The most westerly tip to the most easterly tip. I was trying to tell a particular story. What I realized is, when I was looking at why this education was such an issue, or lack of education, it was because actually you couldn't differentiate that from all of the causes and effects of extreme poverty. And I realized how complex these things are. So that's kind of how that started. And I worked as far as in this expedition with the Victorian Department of Education. They ran an education program, and so all of my blogs, all of my information was they were taking up on that and getting that out there. So that's how that worked as far as education goes. But it's also just creating awareness, and there's all these incredible characters and stories, and putting just a really grounded perspective of the real Africa, which was, I think, probably the biggest thing.
So amazing. And for those of you, I'll have obviously Kate's web links on my podcast platform, but when you actually see Kate cycling through deserts and such remote areas and how rugged it is, and also the videos that you've put together about, the scenery and the environment and the people that you meet, and the the lifestyle that they're actually living when you're actually imagining those families in some pretty wild shacks and things of that nature, educating their children and how life works. It's actually phenomenal. So I was going to ask you then, do you have a videographer? Do you have a team? The logistics in me imagining this 10-month trip is just phenomenal, right? So what happens with Team Kate? Are you just a superwoman who just loves all that detail, all that connecting? How do you even know which town you're going to be arriving in? You know, what does that actually take, and who supports you in that way?
This was the first expedition that I did that was supported, because in the past I'd tried with film things, but just the quality isn't good enough on my own. So I realized to film things, and particularly all the interactions with people, there's no way I can film that. Yeah. So and even with, you know, traveling with someone, there's no way we can film it effectively and tell the kind of story that I was designing. So fortunately, I had an amazing support vehicle driver who was very experienced in driving through Africa. So he coordinated the expedition support. He's in Scotland, so here I am in Melbourne. He's in Scotland. We've not met in person, and we've sort of getting all this together. I've done loads of research. I found a young guy to start cycling with me, who had tried to cycle down the west coast of Africa and had to pull out, wasn't badly, you know, so he really wanted to finish off his journey. So he had sort of, I thought, a good motivation to do that. And then initially I had a young cameraman from Melbourne who I knew his father and stuff, and I sort of helped him at Deakin University. I mean, I couldn't afford to pay someone. It was already that expensive. You know, the hardest thing about this stuff is actually pulling it all together, and finding the funding. He wasn't cut out for the job, but it's very, very complex. But I think I had, well, Dan was the cyclist was actually quite good at filming as well. But so we had a start, but then I had to get rid of the young fellow during the journey, like in Mali, because he was also endangering the team by making some really poor decisions after we'd already explained not to do something. And then he wanted to only work 5 days a week. And I said, no, Patty, no. If I'm cycling 10 days straight, you just have to find ways. Anyway, for many reasons, it wasn't working. So we sent him home to Melbourne, and I found someone in the interim, another friend, Claudio von Planter, actually a Swiss filmmaker who's based in London, helped me find the other people. So on the hop, so I'm doing this while cycling through to Timbuktu and to all these places, and I'm also still having to coordinate all that other stuff behind the scenes and keep.
Exactly. I can just imagine you pedaling away with this laptop in your backpack, sort of like going, okay, well, when I get a little stop, I'm going to have to start reorganizing things. And
well, we have to think how to handle all of it, like sensitively, and also communications is very, very difficult. So you can't, there's not Bluetooth or not Wi-Fi anywhere. So even though it's only 10 years, 2010, our world's changed so much in the last decade or so. So yeah, communications were very difficult. And yeah, so it wasn't that simple, finding a place where we could communicate, especially going through some of those places, but it worked basically. I had such a network, and another thing that worked really, really well, I connected and was sponsored by a whole lot of different Australian resource companies that had interests in Africa. So that was one of my strategies for finding the funding and also the network support. And maybe that came up with about 1/3 of the funding that I needed. But the other really big thing was that I'd chosen organizations or companies that had bases in different countries where we really needed help. So at the start, in the middle in Cameroon, at the finish in Somalia, in Puntland, like I wouldn't have got through to the tip of Somalia without this incredible help from the Puntland government. But that all came from these connections with, there were 11 different companies that I connected with that, they have their Mr. Fix-It people who can make things happen, make the visa situation flow. We had bases in certain cities where we needed to connect and have pit stops. So actually all those logistics works. So I got to the finish 4 days ahead of schedule this time after 10 months. So carefully timed with the seasons to go through the base of the Sahara during the winter, through the coolest part of the year, crossing the equator twice. Couldn't avoid all of the mud and all of everything, but we sort of minimized that time in the wet season, and then getting to the finish. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, making that work with the seasons was quite tricky. Going the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, yeah. So, but I said, just the rest of it is keeping going, and for all of these things, it's really about making sure you've done, you know why you're doing it before you even start.
Yeah.
So it's making sure that all of that is really strong before we start, because otherwise when times get tough, you know, it'd be easier to give up, but you'll never give up if you really believe in what you're doing. So, you know,
100%, because you've got two things. You're doing this incredible journey. So that's right, to get to the end, you know, it's like, oh, you've always got the finish line in mind. And, you know, the fact that you even got there 4 days early. So that's an achievement in itself, because that actually relates to even records and things that you've attained. But that's right. But the deeper why driving in you in these sustainability development goals, and actually getting people's stories out and being able to do that with real, you know, authenticity and honor, and being able to capture the essence of what you're trying to do to make a difference following the trip, right? So it's actually being able to pop that into a story that is then able to be shared on your blogs, in your videos, in all of your material. It is really quite, you know, I imagine that is that, you know, that why is the strength of, well, I have to keep going because there's another story at the next place that I'm ready to arrive at.
Absolutely. And just, you've got all the sponsors, got the kids following, got, as you say, it's just everything. And you've got, you know, your own integrity, really, saying, look, I'm going to do this. I can do this. This is how it's, you know, it is possible. And, you know, I'd imagine this incredible story. And gee, it was, I mean, the hardest thing probably about the journey was managing the team, because I'm out there, and this is what I learnt quite quickly with being supported. It's often more difficult than being unsupported, because I've got people in there doing different things. You know, there was a time when John, we knew, always had to go back to Scotland for 2 months, and he had arranged for someone else to come, and he was terrible. Like, he was okay at driving, but he didn't get it. And it was, he turned the vehicle, the environment in the vehicle, like poison. And I'm going through the tropics, you know, I'm out in the mud and getting wet, and, you know, just trying to keep things steady. And they've got these 3 people in the vehicle, just, it's first of all, 2 of them, the cyclist who started with me, who hurt his knee and wanted to keep coming with us, and the driver, and their attitude was just, it was really hard to shoulder. And I thought, well, he's only with us for 2 months. I've just got to keep steady and just keep on with it and try to joke along, and whatever they're doing, I've just got to keep dragging them along and making sure that they don't stop. So yeah, there was that kind of issue, which was probably that was probably the hardest thing.
Yeah, it would be. And I love your steely focus and determination of, like, just rise above it, and you know, you've still got to do what you're wanting to achieve. But that is one of the challenges, you know, which you've actually demonstrated. It's what actually happens in a work environment as well. It's the culture within your own business, your work environment, even out on a trail, in a bus. You know, it's actually trying to get that alignment of values and why and purpose to achieve, which is really difficult, because you've also got the complexities of availability of people, timing of people, skill set of people in a pretty unusual situation. And so there must be times that you realize, you know, well, okay, this is not ideal, and in my general day-to-day, I wouldn't allow this to happen, but I have to soldier on, I have to rise above. What did you learn about yourself? What adaptations did you have to make and learn in the earlier days to succeed in these kind of challenges?
Well, you have to be a little bit more, because I tend to be, as you say, very focused, but I realized when you've got a team around you, I've got to find out, you know, I with Africa, for example, I had, people from the UK that I hadn't met. And so we didn't really know each other. I couldn't afford to say, apart from the driver, I couldn't afford to pay people. So I had to try to get people with the right motivation, but you don't really know them because you're under extreme pressure. And that's when people's characters can really come out under all sorts of pressures. And so I was experiencing the land and the cultures and things quite differently on a bike to them, who are trapped in a vehicle. So I was trying to imagine what that is like and why they're thinking that way. So I guess it's the ability to empathize with everyone and try to lead them in terms of being positive, trying to sort of talk through something. Some things that was in that situation that I described was actually better to just jolly it along, because I wasn't, it was just, there was nothing I could do about it. I did everything that I could. So I'm just going to be positive around them, whatever that takes. And it was taking from me internally, but I just had to keep going. And then when the other fellow, when John came back, and we had the best filmmaker with us, and just our little team was just ran like clockwork. so you had the right people, but I haven't always had that chance to have the right people. But gradually I'm is trying to pull people along, and it's, as you say, all these things are very, very complex. The most complex journey I've ever done was just recently. It was the Andes, because I've just cycled a 4,400 kilometer journey from Cusco in Peru, through Bolivia, through the Altiplano, through the Atacama, but always at altitude, right through Argentina, through the Puna de Atacama, and finishing at the highest volcano in the world. Looking at sort of this time of sort of a bit of a focus on the Andean people, past and present, and what the mountains that I'm climbing and means to them. Right? So it started back in 2020, and first thing happened even before I left. I thought I had a really great local filmmaker, and he pulled the pin with less than 3 weeks to go. So suddenly I had to find another plan. So I found a Peruvian, film company and got someone to do the Peruvian bit. And then I had a friend who's okay, sort of not as experienced as some of the others, but he was fine. He was going to come and do the rest. In the meantime, that's when COVID started. And then, did 1,100 kilometers. I was in Bolivia. It got to the point where actually all the borders are closing, and the Prime Minister saying, got to come home now. Managed to get the last flight out of Bolivia. So that was in 2020, March 2020. And then I just, always needed to go back and finish that journey. So had to start again to organize everything, apart from the driver that I had in Bolivia, who also came at the last minute then, because something happened to the driver that I'd organized. So there was just one thing after another. He was great. So he came back. So he drove for the whole time. I had to find all funding again, a lot more funding. This time I've started to do quite well with TV series and filmmaking. So now the expectation is higher. So I have to bring in higher level filmmakers, and that costs. And, I'm learning all the time. So, it was a totally different team. These people were really good, actually, at everything. So I didn't have any issues with the team other than it's complex, because two of them were coming from the UK. I had the Bolivian driver, and we're all communicating and trying to get that, with the flights as they are, it took me 42 hours to fly, I think, to La Paz this time, because I had to go by, so all these things are complex, and you're conducting all this, and you don't it's an adventure, but you've got to finish on time, got to have different stories to tell, I'd set up different things. So we just kept getting curveballs all the time, crossing borders, information that's available, not available, what Chile's doing, so it's just learning to adapt and say, making sure firstly what the purpose of, you really know the purpose and the why, and it's got to be, every expedition is different, and it's about then understanding or creating sort of a rhythm, how we work together, and yeah, just pushing through it when it's tough. But if you have all those things together, then I guess that's what, you know, I probably always have been pretty determined to get through things, whether it's on the sporting field or you know, working out a way to succeed. But yeah, just maybe it's a bit more patience, and just, you know, I had to adapt so many times in this last journey, or most, but in particular. So yeah, it's just finding different ways to get to the finish.
I think you've beautifully communicated the top tips on how to be successful. Actually, it's, you know, it's that steely focus, it's the why that drives you, it's the resilience that you build, and you just go, okay, this is a challenge, how do I adapt, how do I reassess, how do I now make that work, how do I stay focused even though some bits are really challenging and hard. I think for those listening in, that's a textbook definition of why Kate has been so successful in what she's done. And also, I love what you shared there on having to just constantly, you know, quality improve, as well as your profile, you know, rose over those years, you know, when you're in the early stages and you can just probably have a phone videoing and then you suddenly get someone who says, oh yeah, I'll do it. And then now, once you get to that professional level and people start knowing you, and then you're wanting to get that funding, you know, for your future, you know, Netflix series, whatever, you know, could be happening, then you actually have to then show up at that level, because to actually get that funding, they're expecting a certain level. So it is a constant level up for you. I can see as this journey has progressed.
Absolutely. And like, I'm good at the cycling bit, I'm good at the active bit, and I'm good at the planning bit, but then on the other side is presenting, it's getting better at giving presentations, it's filming, it's writing. You know, I've written 2 books. You know, I didn't know how to do that at the start. No one taught me. I just had to work it out, you know, and get little bits of advice here and there. And now the film bit, there's so much more pressure doing that. And I always struggle to keep that balance between, this is an adventure. We don't want it just to be like a set up TV show. That's not what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like, yeah, sometimes I might have to cycle a little bit again just for them to do something, but it's
pretty much raw.
Yeah, it's got to be raw. It's got to be, to me, the best stuff and parts of my films are the things when I'm actually on the bike and I'm talking to the camera and it's natural, and my voice is up, and, you know, I'm trying to stay away from the sort of forced presentation that I see in so many adventure films. That's just boring.
And it's not reality TV, you know. No, it's about you
not.
Just arriving at a destination, and that's their life, and then you're having those conversations at that time. They're not rehearsed, they're not planned, they're not scripted. This is actually just entering someone else's world and assessing their situation, and so that you can share their story, not your prepared, predetermined story. I know also, after reading about your South Pole trek, I read that you have to have lots of preparatory trips. You know, you can't just suddenly go on a trip, you know, one of these big trips. You actually have to prepare. And sometimes that preparation is in a whole lot of destinations that are not the destination that you're actually going to go on, you know. So how does that work? Why do you have to do so many challenging trips if it's not? I thought you'd actually just do a little bit more and more and more of the area that you're trying to do.
Well, it started off like, I'm no good at the cold, I'm good at the heat. And you know, having cycled a lot in sand, especially the Canning Stock route, and then at the base of the Sahara, and now with the advent of fat bikes, i.e. bicycles with wide tires, you know, people have been trying to cycle through Antarctica, and it just suddenly opened up a whole new world with these fat bikes and what I could do with them. And so the first thing was to try to get some experience in the extreme cold. So I've done 4 expeditions that are in the Arctic, so Svalbard, Northeast Greenland, and these are all like, no one does this stuff, you know. So I'm going to places, and same with Arctic Canada, going up, you know, cycling across the Beaufort Sea. It's ridiculous. But how did I get here? As one of the, you know, cycling down the fjord that's frozen in Norway, sorry, in Greenland. It's like in North Greenland. It's crazy. But that's what I was doing to sort of learn about the conditions and how to deal with them, even though Antarctica is slightly different types of snow and things to the north. You know, in an ideal world, I would have been able to find the sponsorship that I needed, but it's a big bucks for Antarctica to do a supported expedition we need around about $1 million. And I haven't managed to find that kind of funding. So then I thought, well, let's start to develop the education program and start creating really cool content. And so then I thought, well, what a great challenge it would be to do an expedition on every continent, but that's preparatory for Antarctica. So it's keeping me sharp.
Yeah.
And it's either like in polar conditions, like in Iceland, or close enough to, and then sort of in altitude or in sand, because cycling in sand is very similar to cycling in snow, very similar attributes to what you need with the loose surfaces and very similar techniques. So I thought so I've used that as a sort of a way of creating some really out there expeditions. So I've made and sort of ideas that I've had that think, oh no, that's not possible kind of thing before. Like I was always intrigued with Namibia's skeleton coast, but now I think, oh, maybe with my fat bike I can cycle it. Like no one's done that before. And these are not just normal fat bikes, they're actually all-wheel drive. It's something I've developed. I didn't invent it, but I found a guy in the US, in Philadelphia, who'd made all-wheel drive mountain bikes. So in other words, when the front wheel slips, when the back wheel slips, the front wheel engages automatically. So it doesn't make you go faster, but it gives better grip. And I tracked him down and convinced him to try making a fat bike with the all-wheel drive system in, which he's been on the journey, this whole journey with me now, developing the bike. So I've got 4 of them, 5 Christini bikes actually, all sort of developing them because he was designing it from scratch. You can't just add the system in afterwards. It's actually got to be designed into the frame of the bike and improving it. So each of these journeys I've been testing new bikes. So fat bike number 2 is now my sand bike, and I've cycled it down Namibia's entire coastline. I've cycled it along the Fink River in Australia, which is also known as Larapinta. It's like often referred to as the oldest river in the world, or part of it is. And I cycled just over 500 kilometers of it from its start, where Ormiston and Davenport Creeks meet, and basically cycled right through to the town of Fink or Apatula. And that's probably one of the best little expeditions I've done, but you couldn't do that without a fat bike, and you couldn't do that without all the experience that I've had before, like just getting the idea to do something like that. But suddenly you're off track, no roads at all, whether it's the beach for Namibia. And they're often some of the best expeditions. So it is keeping me sharp for Antarctica, and it is actually seriously hard work. You're cycling on sand dunes. It's very similar. So it serves 2 purposes, but also these expeditions have all become just great expeditions in their own right, and as especially the one on the Skeleton Coast and the Andes one, the altitude, and the one in the Indian Himalaya, they're all, and the Australian one, they're all really special. And so that's it. I can't just go and do any expedition just for the sake of doing it. It needs to, I've thought about the story. What is the story I'm trying to create each time? And it doesn't matter if it's a smaller expedition or a big one. Those things just have to be. And the only thing with all of the expeditions cost. It's like conducting this big orchestra that have to like pull all those things together and sort of make sure that I can do it myself. But I can kind of
set yourself up to fail. But you've got that constant demand, that's right, for sponsorship, to be having people sponsor you. So that's right, you've got to elevate yourself. And I love what you were sharing before about you go from being a bike rider and adventurer to then suddenly, you've got to be good at media. You've got to be able to communicate your message. You've got to be, a brand that other people are happy to make you to sponsor, or for you to sponsor for them. And so, because all of this does take money so that you can actually achieve your purpose driven, focus of being able to elevate these people's, lives and stories, so that you can have a real impact, which must just be incredible joy. Now, you are just the most phenomenal athlete athlete, talk about going from all extremes, from altitude to Antarctica, and being able to show up every day in different sort of situations. How do you look after Kate? How do you, I know you're obviously physically ridiculously fit, but how do you nurture yourself? How do you take time out? Do you also balance that with like yoga and meditation and other things, or are you always on the go?
I'm not very, like when I'm not cycling, I'm working at the Royal Melbourne Tennis Club, and I'm just doing 3 days a week mostly and step it up when they need it. But that's also my social life as well, because it's like family. It really is. So, so that's just nice to have a bit of an outlet, and it's I don't have to worry too much about going out everywhere. I have friends there, and that's kind of very cool. It might seem strange, but I actually like getting out on the bike sometimes at home, because it's just, well, I've got to keep my legs moving, but it just clears my mind, and that's where I get good ideas. And even if I'm going for walks or whatever, just along the Yarra River, whatever, it's just, I just need that time to clear my mind, and that's where I get most of it. But I'm not, I'm not very good at. I should be better at having more me time. But it's just constantly just trying to. I'm not happy unless I'm actually got things under control that I'm working towards. Just whether it's interviews or I've got a couple more meetings today or whatever, just trying to set things up, trying to pull, because most of my stuff is bespoke. So I'm trying to pull something from here and something from here, and I can see a connection, but I've got to sort of convince others that there's a connection there. So I kind of like that challenge, but that ain't always, the timing might not be right for those potential sponsors or partners. So it's kind of just trying to see things. And so when you say, I love, I actually I come from Western Australia, so I don't have any family here. So just going home to see family there, and that's all cool. But I don't do Pilates, of course, to maintain myself. But
that's woman on a mission.
That's kind of what I do. Go out and have good times sometimes. But other than that, it's setting things up and moving forwards.
So what's your ultimate vision? What's your ultimate dream that you will have fulfilled in your lifetime?
Look, I'm really trying to set up, just been talking with some lawyers actually about setting up my own foundation, the Breaking the Cycle Foundation, which kind of, I've had this idea for quite a few years, and it takes a little bit to set it up and do it right. But I have this idea of pulling in the education side of things, but it's all about leadership education. And obviously I've met so many organizations on my journeys that not the big ones, just the smaller ones that I'd love to help. And it's kind of this idea of being able to support them, but also they would, in order to be supported, they also need to receive some young leaders and have a really immerse themselves in real life experience, and sort of setting up an education program around that, so that I have pulling all these things that I'm doing bits of here, and each time I have to kind of almost reinvent the wheel, and I just want to be able to pull that together and then build that. So it doesn't always have to be huge journeys, but it would help me formalize the focus that I have. So I'd like that to be a cool legacy if I can pull that together.
I'm very confident you'll pull that together. I don't think Dr. Kate Leeming has a, no, that won't happen sort of view on things. I think you're so tenacious and you're so, dedicated to what you want to achieve that it will definitely happen. I think what you've been doing around the world is absolutely inspirational and truly amazing. How do those people listening in connect with you? What would you love them to learn about? How can they help you? How can they get involved? What's the best way to contact you?
Well, it's pretty easy to contact me from my website. It actually has two URLs. The easiest one to remember is kateleeming.com. The other one's breakingthecycle.education. So they can press contact there and contact me that way. I'm also on social media. I think you've got the media handles for absolutely. That. So that's, I'm really trying to pull together. I mean, we've been working towards Breaking the Cycle South Pole for pretty much a decade. So, I need to get that done. And there's lots I can give, but it's very hard to find the right organization or organizations. I mean, it is big money, but then I'm pretty confident of being able to give great value as well. It's just finding that, it's very difficult sometimes stuck here to be able to create that kind of money. I can get the smaller ones sort of done. I'm certainly developing relationships with various brands, but I'm not the best social media person in the world. But I'm not in a position to afford to employ someone to do it. So I'm kind of stuck. So I've got a TV show that's a series on the Skeleton Coast that's been Nat Geo Asia and Outside TV and around the world, except Australia and the UK, which is really annoying. So, I mean, it's had millions of views, but no one here knows who I am. A few people do. So it's kind of a fickle world sometimes, and I've just got to keep bashing away until I
keep bashing away. And seriously, those listening in, particularly if you're a TV network, someone who can actually give, Kate a leg up, to be able to have this opportunity. That's right. This woman actually has done all the work for you. She delivers every single time. She keeps punching above her weight time and time again. Her evidence of her journeys is just absolutely phenomenal. When you go to her websites and actually just tap into it, you'll just go, wow, wow, wow. It is just seriously breathtaking what you have achieved and what you've actually done for others, and that is the most important thing, right? It's the opportunities for those voices to be heard when no one knows about these people around the world and the living conditions that they're in and the opportunities they have, particularly for education. And I'm super passionate about education, particularly for young girls, and to be able to change that trend globally. So if you're in a position that you actually go, you know what, I can throw some cash at this, I can actually sponsor, I can even help some social media queen who goes, you know what, I'll donate my time, I'll do anything. There's ways that you can help and support someone who is just so 100% dedicated to making a difference on this planet, which Dr. Leeming is doing every single day. Definitely reach out. I can't encourage you enough to just sort of make that move. She's very easy to find. All of your details will be on my podcast platform. They'll be on my YouTube channel, in all of my socials. So it is definitely not hard to do. Contact Kate. We wish you all the best in your future success, Kate. Absolutely. You are definitely going to do all of those journeys and ones that you cannot even imagine now. I am praying that your health continues and that you do have a little bit of me time along the way. But you seem to be, invincible at this stage. Just incredible. Absolutely incredible. And also we know that there's always people behind the scenes who do help and commit and make all these things happen. So whether they're frustrating or not frustrating at times, we also appreciate the collective that throws these trips together. And how I love the conversation we've had today, because it's shown us, that you can actually do the fun bits and the wins and the celebrates. You're a woman who just loves to cycle. Like, what a dream. You're living your dream. But you also appreciate that, you have to then tie that with, your purpose of what you're trying to achieve, as well as for yourself, for others. And then also realizing that, this is actually a business as well. Things have to be funded. You have to learn these new skills. And I know those people listening in who are in my Women's Business Incubator programs and the Women's Business Tribe, they're listening in, and we talk about this all the time. We talk about how you've got to grow yourself as your opportunities arise. You have to be dedicated. You have to be tenacious. You have to build that resilience. And I think our conversation today has actually, amplified that message crystal clear as to how you've achieved what you've done. So thanks for being on my program today.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks. It's been fun chatting. So it's been fantastic. Thanks very much.